Hey everyone, my name is Deborah and welcome back to my channel. Today what I thought would be fun to talk about, since birth is at the forefront of my mind, I'm pregnant with my third baby that's due in July. I thought it would be fun to go back to my first pregnancy. That was an unassisted home birth, and it wasn't planned to be an unassisted home birth. It was supposed to be a home birth with a midwife. So I thought I'd share that story. I'll go back to my first pregnancy, which is fun. It wasn't that long ago. This happened in November of 2019, so about 3 years ago. And so it'll just be nice to talk about it. I thought this would be helpful for any first-time moms or even second-time moms or even anyone who's considering a home birth. It doesn't have to be scary, and it was a great experience for me. And so I thought it would be great to talk about that today. Since this was 3 years ago, I'll have my phone, I'll be looking at a couple of notes so we can kind of just talk about what happened. So I have recorded my birth stories before. When I recorded my first birth with the birth hour. I can link that below in the details. It might be actually on their Patreon page, but I can maybe just find the name of the title or the episode number and I'll put it below. And anyone who has a Patreon page might be able to just still listen to it. But I also recorded my first and second birth stories, which were both home births, with the Birth Story in Color podcast, and those I believe should still be on their page, so I can link that below for anyone who just wants to listen to it as a podcast. But I thought it'd be fun to record this, to keep the memories for myself, and one day for my daughter if she chooses to want to listen to her own birth story. But I thought it'd be fun to discuss this. Go back about 3 years, which is so crazy for me to think about. So I was 40 weeks in 2 days when I went into labor. It was on November 17th, this was 2019, and I'd started early that morning. So I think I'd woken up around 6 o'clock in the morning and gone to the bathroom like I normally do early in the morning, and my underwear was soaking wet. And that was a little weird, but again, I was still really tired, and towards the end of pregnancy, everything is always juicy down there. So again, this is going to be TMI, so if you're not a mom or if you're not into real birth stories and hearing all those details, this may not be for you. But I'm going to include them because I love to hear all the details when I was a first-time mom or trying to learn more about birth and labor, and I would scour YouTube just for birth stories and videos. So I'll put all the details in for people who want to know. So I didn't think anything of it. I changed my underwear, I went back into bed, I went back to sleep. And then I think around 7:30 or 8, I was in bed. I think I was on my left side. I shifted to my right, and I felt a little bit of trickle down my inner thigh, and I thought that was so weird. I was like, okay. So I went to the bathroom, and again, my underwear was soaking wet. It was at this point, I found it to be really, really weird. So I went and I talked to my mom, and so my mom gives us this beautiful gift. When any of me or my sisters are having a baby, she'll come and stay with us for about a month or a month and a half, just to kind of help us transition to this new period as being a new mom, which is such a blessing. And so she was here. She got here when I was about 38 weeks just to kind of help me out. And so I went and I talked to her, and I told her that my underwear just kind of felt really wet. And so she thought my water had started to break, and my waters had started to break, and I wasn't too sure, because I'm from what I learned in birth classes or from stuff that I've seen on online, people said that when their water broke, it was kind of either a gush or a slow continuous leak. Mine it only felt that way if I shifted a certain way in bed. I would just feel a little bit of trickle of water. So she suggested I go get a pad and put it on just in case. And then she also suggested that I have a hearty breakfast, since if this was the onset of labor, that if I didn't want to eat when I was in real labor, at least to get some food in my belly. So, that was a great idea. So I went and I made myself some oatmeal. And so me and my mom were just talking and just chatting while I had my breakfast. And right after I finished eating, I immediately got the urge to throw up. And that was weird, because throughout my pregnancy, I was never nauseous, I never had morning sickness, and I never threw up. And actually that's happened with all 3 of my pregnancies. I luckily have not had any morning sickness or been sick. So that was kind of weird. And so after that happened, I went and I woke up my husband who was still sleeping, and I was like, honey, guess what? Like, I think my water broke. I think I might be starting labor. And he just looked at me and was like, okay. And then like rolled over and went back to sleep, which was fine, you know, still early in the morning. And if this was labor, he probably should have gotten some sleep. So he went back to bed, and then he woke up at some point, and at around like 11:30 in the morning, we ended up calling my midwife to tell her what had happened. At this point, I still wasn't having any type of like, my waters weren't, like I didn't have any trickling of, like water wasn't trickling out, nothing really happened. And when I did go back to lay down for a little bit, it only happened if I like shifted my body in a certain way. It would just be a little bit like of a trickle of water, and it kind of felt like almost like, I don't know, if you pee and you didn't wipe yourself well and you'd have like a trickle. That's kind of what it felt like to me. And so we called my midwife and I told her what was going on. And so she kind of had 2 thoughts. It was either one, you know, towards the end of pregnancy, things get a little juicy and wet, more wet down there, and that's what it could have been. Or 2, it could have been like a small little tear within the amniotic sac, and that's probably why a little bit of water has come out, and maybe as the baby's head is moving or shifting, it might seal it up. And so she said that there's, you know, one way we can kind of figure that out is by wearing a pad and going to do some lunges or sitting on your pregnancy ball or taking a long walk and seeing if that either jump starts like contractions or if, you know, more water will come. So she said to go do that and call her back in a couple of hours and let her know where we're at, and, you know, to figure out the next steps. So we're like, okay, cool, we'll do that. And so around noon, my husband and I decided that we were gonna go take a walk around the neighborhood. And so we took a really, really long walk. We literally walked, I think, for like an hour and a half around the whole neighborhood. There were stairs, I did stairs. I was just really trying to get everything. I was trying to do anything just to see if labor was gonna start. And of course, nothing happened. I think the only thing I got was just, I think, some Braxton Hicks contractions, and that was pretty much it, which was super annoying and kind of weird. So I'm like, what is happening? If I'm not in labor, then why isn't anything happening? So that was a little frustrating. So one of the biggest fears I had as I was, you know, nearing the end of my pregnancy with my first is, like, I think every first-time mom has that, is how do I know when it's labor? How do I know it's real labor? How do I know it's not false labor? And I talked to any of my mom friends, anyone who I knew had babies, and I just would ask them, how did you know you were in labor? Or like, what do contractions feel like? Because again, as a first-time mom, everything is theoretical. You don't know what it really feels like until you actually go through it. And, you know, some people were like, oh, it just feels like cramps. Some people were like, it's just so painful, you're gonna die. And then some people were like, I think my nail tech, I was talking to my nail tech, I think about like a week or so before I went into labor. And so she was telling me that the way she knew she was in labor was she started to get Braxton Hicks contractions. They were consistent, timeable, and that's how her labor started. And in my mind, I had started to get some Braxton Hicks, obviously more and more towards the end of my pregnancy. I literally thought, okay, so if I get consistent Braxton Hicks, that's exactly how my labor is gonna start. Of course, it didn't. But I did have one time, again, like after I talked to my nail tech, there was one day that I was having consistent Braxton Hicks, and I was convinced that I was going into labor. Like, I told my mom, told my sisters, I told my husband, he left work early, and of course, nothing happened. I was not going into labor. I think even after, like, I think this was happening as I was sitting down. When I ended up getting up and actually walking around, they kind of went away pretty much. So I was not in labor. And so I think the only piece of advice that I got from anyone that was useful, but at the time I discarded it, was from my mom. And my mom and I asked her, she's had 4 kids. One of her pregnancies were twins, because I'm a twin. And I asked her, and she said, you'll know it's labor when it hurts. And I remember thinking, that is the most unuseful advice you could ever give. Like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, what does that even mean? And I remember thinking, like, how, like, I need tangible advice, because that what you gave me means nothing. And obviously, in hindsight, it meant everything. I've even given my friends this advice, like, you'll know it's real labor when it hurts. It's not going to be an unfamiliar feeling to you. You will know. Because I think, you know, as women, our bodies are intelligently designed. I'll explain what contractions felt like. So contractions feel like, to me, I know that some people experience it differently, but to me it feels like period cramps that are more intense, and they gradually get more and more intense and maybe more sharp as they come. And so the minute when I went into labor, the minute I had the contraction, I knew what it was. There was no mistaking what it was, and it wasn't an unfamiliar feeling to me. So when my mom had said that to me, the minute when I did go into labor, it clicked in my mind what she meant. But anyways, back to the story. So when, after our walk, me and my husband got back to the apartment, and of course my pad was bone dry. My waters, I guess, really didn't break, or at least not fully, and nothing had happened. I think I'd only had a couple of Braxton Hicks on that whole walk, and that was pretty much it. So then after our walk, I think around 2 o'clock or so, we just decided that we were just gonna rest and take a nap. And we took a good nap for like about almost 2 hours, which was, I think, great. I think in hindsight, I think my body was preparing me for what was to come, but we had a good long nap, which was so refreshing. And I'll pause to mention, like, during this whole day, I think, again, my body was preparing me for what was to come. Like, I started to go to the bathroom at least like 5 times that day, and my body was really just starting to empty itself out. And, you know, again, I think, you know, our bodies just prepare itself in different ways and slowly. And that's what was happening to me. And so then we spent the rest of the day just really hanging out and not doing much around the apartment. I did have a birth class. I think it was the second to last, or maybe it was the last birth class that was scheduled for that day. And we just kind of were like, we just don't feel like going. We just want to skip it. And I was like, at this time, I'm like, if I didn't even go into labor, I don't feel like actually going to this class. I'm done with this. I just want to lay down. I'm already at the end of my pregnancy. I don't feel like doing anything. I'm huge. I'm waddling. I don't want to go anywhere. So we just decided to skip the class and not go. And one thing I do want to mention is, again, as you know, my mom is a wise woman, and a lot of times I'll discard what she says, but later on it does come into play. And so that whole day, my mom was having terrible stomach pains and was like, she just felt really sick to her stomach, and she was complaining all day long that she was like, I believe you're going into labor. Like, I know you're going into labor. There's no way I'm getting all of these pains for nothing. Like, I know I'm a mom. I know you're going to go into labor today. And I kept, of course, me being, you know, super naive and, you know, arrogant. I was just like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, you're just being like, my mom we call her like a prophet, because she always just like says like wild things. And we were just like, okay, Mom, you don't know what you're saying. But she was convinced. She kept telling me all day long. She's like, there's no way I'm getting these stomach pains for no reason. Like, I know you're going into labor. And I was just like, okay, whatever. But so around 8 o'clock, my twin sister, who lived in the area, came by to visit with her husband, and we were just hanging out for a little while. And of course, nothing was happening. And she only stayed for about like an hour. And before she left, she was like, if you go into labor and I have to come back here, I will be so mad. And I was like, I am not going into labor, trust me. Nothing has happened. Clearly my water didn't break. I haven't had any contractions. I'm not going into labor. And so she was like, all right, bye, I'll see you later. And that was pretty much it. Shortly after that, I think after we walked them out, me and my husband decided, you know what we should do? We should just walk around the apartment building that we were living at the time and just try and see if we can just walk this baby out. So we walked for like an hour up and down the flight of stairs. I was doubling the stairs, doing lunges, power walking throughout this whole apartment building, just trying to see if I can get any type of labor happening or contractions happening or anything. And well, of course, I don't think I even got a Braxton Hicks that whole time. Nothing happened. And I think around like maybe, I think 9:30 or 10 o'clock, we got back to the apartment and we were just hanging out on the couch. I had dinner. I think I ate spaghetti, a big plate of spaghetti or something like that. And I remember feeling the slightest bit of cramp. Like it was so slight that I felt it and I was just like, okay, I just kind of wrote it off. It didn't really feel like much of anything, but it was like the tiniest little like wave of a cramp. But then after that, nothing happened. And so we decided to just call it a night and we'll just watch TV in bed. So we just went to our bedroom, got ready for the night. I put my diffuser on. I had been diffusing clary sage by this time, like I think I started to diffuse it towards the end of my 39 weeks. I didn't really want to, because if you're not unfamiliar with the essential oil clary sage, it can cause uterine contractions. So that's why you kind of have to be pretty careful with when you use it, and obviously you use it under the advisement of your midwife or your practitioner or doctor or whatever. And so I decided that I was going to use it towards the end of my pregnancy just in case. So I was I think towards the end of my 39 weeks, I just started to diffuse it. And if your body is ready to go into labor, it can jumpstart it. And so I'd been doing that, and of course it hadn't been working the past few nights. And so today I just put it on and I was sitting on the bed. We were watching Jack Ryan, one of our favorite shows on Amazon Prime, and we were just watching that. And I was just practicing my deep breathing exercises. And as I was doing my deep breathing exercises, inhaling the clary sage and just trying to breathe, I remember hearing an internal pop. And to this day, I will still say I heard this pop. My husband didn't hear it, but it was so audible that I heard it. And I was like, that is weird. And I literally just kind of sat there for a second. And then I got up, I went to the bathroom, and out came my mucus plug, and it was in its full shape because I hadn't lost any. Like, I know some women, before they go into labor, their body will start to like dislodge some pieces of their mucus plug, but I hadn't lost any of it. And so it came out in its whole form at that point. And I called my husband. I was like, I think I just lost my mucus plug. And he came in the bathroom and was like, yeah, that's kind of what it looks like to me too. And I was just kind of surprised. And if you know anything about like labor, real like labor and stuff like that, mucus plug coming out doesn't always necessarily mean that you're going to go into labor right at that moment. It could mean you're going into labor in the next couple hours, and it could mean a few weeks from now or a week from now or so. Because again, sometimes like your pieces of your mucus plug can be coming out in weeks before you go into labor, and it can kind of reform again. But in my mind, I'm like, I feel like labor is about to happen. And so, this was around like 11:15 that this had happened. And so then around like 11:30, I texted my twin sister because she was going to serve as my doula for my birth. She just, she was going to also bring smoothies and kind of things to keep me hydrated during the labor, be an extra pair of hands for my husband. Because I knew that my mother, although she was there, she isn't a person that's all about like seeing birth stuff. She's kind of queasy around all that kind of things, despite having natural births for all of her kids, which is so weird. She does not do well with that. And she also, I don't think, likes to see her children in pain. So I know she wasn't going to be in the room at any point during the labor. And so that was going to be my twin sister's role, kind of to give an extra hand to my husband and, be an extra comfort there for me. And so I texted her, and one thing I will say that if you are doing a home birth or something like that, if you're in labor, don't text your doula or your midwife or whatever. Give them a call. Because especially if it's happening at night. I mean, maybe during the day, that's fine. But at night, you should always probably give them a call because they'll probably be sleeping and they may not be on alert. And so my sister, I don't believe, texted back. I think she had actually gone to bed by this time. And so at that point, me and my husband just decided that we were going to pray. So we prayed over the birth and that everything would be fine. And shortly after we finished praying, I kid you not, I started to get intense contractions. And I think they started anywhere from like 5 to 7 minutes apart, and they felt nothing like Braxton Hicks contractions. And instantly it clicked in my mind what my mom had said to me, I think a week or two before. You'll know it's labor when it hurts, because it hurt. I mean, obviously it wasn't as bad as like maybe transition contractions, but it hurt enough that I knew exactly what it was. And it wasn't an unfamiliar feeling, because I've had period cramps before, so I knew what it felt like, but it just felt like a more intense, sharp version of that. And so after we finished praying and I had started to get some contractions, I went and I talked to my mom and I let her know what was going on. And she was like, I told you were going into labor tonight. And I was just like, oh, whatever. And so she advised that I put on a pad just in case my water broke. And then she said I should probably try and rest if I can. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Because in my mind, I was convinced that I was going to be in labor for 24 to 48 hours. You know, that's the kind of range that they tell new moms to expect for when you go into labor, anywhere between, I don't know, 12, 24, maybe even 48 hours at the longest. And so that was kind of what I had in my mind. I'm like, yeah, probably I should get some rest. And so I think around at 12, so my notes say 12:07 a.m., me and my husband decided to call my midwife, just to kind of let her know what was going on. And so one of what she said was, you know, sometimes when mucus plugs fall out, it may mean the start of labor now, or it may mean a couple of days from now. It may not obviously mean it's like labor is imminent. And, you know, I knew that. And so she said, and I told her that I'd started to get some contractions. And so what she suggested was, you know, sometimes when your mucus plug comes out, it can cause you to have some contractions. And it may not be labor, but it can cause you to get some contractions. And so she suggested that I fill up our bathtub with some hot water and put some, what do you call it, Epsom salt in there, and that can kind of soothe the uterus if it's not really labor. And if it is labor, you will, obviously, it's not going to stop. And so she said I should probably go soak for about an hour and then let her know in like an hour or two what's going on, and then we can kind of talk about the next steps. And so we were like, okay, cool, we'll do that. And so then around 1 a.m., my husband got the bath ready for me, and so I got in and contractions did not stop. They were about, I would say, every 5 to 7 minutes apart, and they were really intense. I was very surprised by that. Videos or even birth stories or anything you read in books, or even what I learned in birth class, they were saying that like when you start labor, early labor, it could start, like contractions can be anywhere from maybe 15, 10 to 20 minutes apart, but mine were like 5 to 7 minutes apart, and they were actually quite intense, and they were lasting anywhere between, by this point, anywhere from 40 seconds to a minute long, which was really, really surprising to me. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this for 24 hours. This is kind of nuts. But at this point, it wasn't as bad as it did get. And so, you know, I was just laying in bed with, like, I was laying in the tub, you know, just trying to go get through these contractions. I had to breathe through them. And around 1:30, I ended up getting out of the tub, and my husband suggested that we try and go to sleep if we can. One thing I wanted to kind of pause and go back to is that I forgot to mention that, so before we went to bed, my husband, who has allergies, had started to feel a little bit itchy before I'd actually gone into labor, and he had taken a Benadryl. So by this time, the Benadryl had started to hit him, and he was kind of getting tired. So I was like, yeah, we should probably try and rest if we can. And so we got into bed, and the contractions started to get more intense. They didn't go away, they just started to intensify. And they started to come consistently every 3 to 5 minutes. And I was like, every time it happened, I would squeeze my husband's hand, and I couldn't sleep, I couldn't rest. And then my body started to just empty itself. Like, I started to have to get out of bed, I would get to the bathroom, have a contraction, and then I would poop. Then I would go back to bed, have a contraction, get up, go to the bathroom. And it was starting to be like this whole like routine. And so after about like 3 or 4 times of this, I was just like, yeah, I woke up my husband. I'm like, hey, you should just kind of go sleep on the couch, and I'm just gonna kind of go through this, because I'm like, this might take a while. And I told him, I said, like, this is early labor, which in hindsight, I don't think it was truly early labor. I think my body instantly kind of went into active labor by this point. And so I was, every time I was just like going to the bathroom, emptying myself. And then I think at about 2 a.m. or so, I started to get my bloody show. I wiped and I saw it, and I was like, there it is. Tangible proof that I'm actually in labor, because I was kind of doubting that I was really in labor. I was like, I don't know why I thought this. I'm like, here's proof, and I'll save it just in case the midwife doesn't believe me that I'm in labor. It's not that she wouldn't have believed me. I don't know why I had that in my mind, but I was like, here's tangible proof I'm actually in labor. I'm having my bloody show. And so I just started to, by that point, I was just laboring on the toilet. And well, for one thing, if you haven't labored on the toilet, one thing to note is that laboring on the toilet, because it causes you to kind of have like empty space in between there, it makes kind of laboring quite effective, and it makes your contractions more and more intense. But that's the only thing that felt comfortable to me. So every time like I would like have a contraction, I just felt the urge to just sit on the toilet, and that was the only thing that felt comfortable to me. So I was kind of going through this whole routine of like, I would get a contraction, sit on the toilet. Right when the contraction was over, I would just go lay on my bed for a little bit, because my bathroom was connected to my bedroom. And I would just go lay on the bed, and I kept doing that back and forth. Like I would labor on the toilet, and then after that I would go and lay on the bed. And I started to, like, at this point, it was nearing 3 a.m. and I was really wondering how I was gonna get through this, because it was starting to get pretty intense, and I was confused about what was going on, where I was in labor, because I'm like, if it feels this intense and the contractions are just so close together, I think at this point they were about maybe around like every 3 to 5 minutes at this point. It was just insanity to me. So it was like a light bulb moment came on my head. It was like, what do you do when you feel like, when I was like, obviously when I had my period, if my periods were like super intense, what would I do? And I was like, I would take Tylenol. That should work. That should numb the pain. And here I am thinking that this Tylenol was gonna work like an epidural works. And spoiler alert, if you're a first-time mom, it does not work. Especially if you're this far, like nothing's gonna dull it unless you get an epidural, pretty much. And so I went into my birth kit, which was right next to my husband where he was sleeping on the couch, to go get some Tylenol. And so I was rifling through the box looking for the bottle of Tylenol, and he like kind of woke up and was like, what are you doing? And I was just like, nothing, I'm just grabbing some Tylenol, go back to bed. And so he was like, okay, let me know what's going on. And I was like, yep, So like I went back to the bathroom, the bedroom, took some Tylenol, and I was literally waiting for it just to, start to work. And it never did work, obviously. It was just too late by then. And so I felt like I was in a fog at this point. I was literally just trying to get through these contractions, which were just really intense by this point. I was jumping, like I started to get hot flashes, so I was jumping into, when my contractions would happen, I would like get really, really hot and sweaty. And then after that would happen, I would get like so cold, and I would just jump like out of bed each time the contraction would happen and walk back and forth, literally just praying and pleading to God for this to be over soon, because I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to do this for like another 12 hours. And I remember just thinking like, this is insane. And then when my contraction would be over, I'd hop back into bed, take a towel, throw it over my shoulder. And then once it started, I could feel it coming back on, I would throw it off of me and just like get really hot and sweaty. And so another thing about contractions is like the way that it kind of works is kind of like a roller coaster. So you'll typically feel the onset of it. It kind of starts slowly. You'll feel it. It'll go up, have a peak, sit at that peak for a little bit, and then it will just start to descend. And then that's when you know the contraction's over. And so my contractions started by this point, they were almost like a minute and a half long, and it was starting to like really just mess with my brain. And I was like, this is insane. I don't know why I thought that this was a great idea. Why did I want to do a home birth or do this naturally? This is crazy. I can't believe people do this. I'm gonna go to the hospital and I'm gonna get an epidural. This was at this point, this was my mindset. I'm like, this is crazy. I'm like done. I'm not doing this. I can't do this for another 12, 24 hours, 48 hours. Because right now I'm only about like 3.5 hours in and this is bananas. And so at this point, I was just like walking around pleading, trying to like, my mind, like when you're in labor, active labor, your mind just starts to, everything kind of feels like a fog. And that's kind of how it was. And I just distinctly remember thinking that this is crazy. I'm going to go get an epidural. Like I'm going to the hospital. And so when I continued to do this for like the next hour, I think, and so one thing I will mention that I didn't get any back labor. So where I felt the contractions the whole time was just in the front. Luckily I didn't have back labor. So it was just really sharp pain in the front. And then it just felt like pressure and really sharp pains, like contraction pains in the front. And so I think as I was just going in and out of bed at this time, and another thing about this fog is I just retreated into myself. For some reason, I didn't want anyone around me. I didn't want anyone to see me, look at me, talk to me. I just wanted to be by myself in complete darkness because my whole bedroom was complete dark and I just didn't want to see anybody or talk to anybody. I kind of turned into a cat and I was just like going into like a dark closet and just didn't want anyone near me. And you know, the stupidity in that was I didn't let my husband know, my mom know, or even my midwife know where I was in labor. And I think I was also confused about where I was in labor. I didn't think that I was that close to giving birth. I thought like I had hours and hours and hours, but I had learned all these things. I had educated myself on it. And I think again, in the fog of labor, you don't think clearly. And I should have known where I was based on what I was feeling, but I was just like, I don't think anyone's gonna believe me that I'm this far along in my labor, and I just started labor. And so I think at 4:30, I was finally, like at 4:30, my contraction had kind of gone away, and I went back to lay down, and instantly I started to get the spins. Kind of like if you get drunk, you go try and lay down or go to sleep, close your eyes, and your head starts spinning. And I instantly like jerked up, ran to the bathroom, tried to throw up in the toilet. I got some of the toilet, but mostly all around. And I was just like, this is getting serious. I need to let somebody know. So after that happened, I went into the kitchen. I woke up my husband and I called my mom, and she comes out and she looks at me and she was like, you are about to give birth. And I was like, in my mind, you don't know what you're talking about. There's no way. And she was like, have you guys called the midwife? And I was like, oh no, we haven't called her yet. And she was like, you guys need to call the midwife and kind of get her here. You look like you're about to give birth. And then I asked her to go clean up the toilet. But at this point, I started to go into I started to hit transition at this point. I could feel it coming on. My whole body lit up in goosebumps. I started to shake involuntarily. I felt hot, I felt cold. And my husband, who saw me shaking, thought I was cold. And he was still groggy at this moment. He had just woken up, still had the Benadryl, I'm sure, on him. And he thought I was cold, so he went and got a blanket and tried to put it on me. And I threw it off and I was like, don't touch me. Kind of like turned into a demon at this point. And I was like, you need to call the midwife. And at this point, I was kind of starting to not get too vocal. Throughout the whole beginning of my labor, I wasn't really moaning or making any noise. And I don't know why, I never moaned or anything. It's kind of, everything was just internal and silent and quiet. But at like 4:45 a.m., my husband called the midwife. And because obviously he wasn't there throughout the laboring that I'd been through, he didn't really know where I was in that stage of labor, and I hadn't vocalized to him that I thought where I was. And so he thought that I had just, you know, started like labor. And so he let the midwife know that my contractions had kind of just started up. And so I could kind of hear what she was saying. And I think she had said, you know, if she can eat, let's get her something to eat. And if she can rest, it's best if she can rest. Call me back in about like an hour or so. We'll check in to see where she was. And I don't fault her for that because, again, she didn't know where I was in that stage of labor. My husband hadn't communicated that effectively to her, and he didn't know where I was in that stage of labor. He had just woken up. And so as I really started to get hot flashes around this time, I told my mom and my husband to kind of get the bed ready, and I had wanted to do a water birth, and so we had a birth tub, like an aqua doula, and I told my husband to get that ready. And for some reason, we had the aqua doula in our apartment sitting there in like the living room for weeks. Because my midwife had dropped it off, but for some bizarre reason we never got it together or even tried to assemble it to see how it worked and to make sure that we knew how to use it. And so at this time he had no idea how to use it, and he's like fumbling to turn on the TV to try and watch a video about how to assemble it. And my mom's in the room trying to get the bed ready for us. And I was at this point, I was just like, I can't deal. Like, the lights are on. I just need to be in the dark, like an animal. I don't want anyone to talk to me. So I went into our guest bathroom, turned off all the lights, and I was just in there. And at this point, my husband was in the living room, which is pretty close to where the guest bathroom was. And he said that the noises that he heard me making, which is why I knew I was probably hitting transition, is because I started to get extremely vocal. Like, he said I was moaning, like almost like this deep tribal moaning that he never had heard before. And he was like, it was kind of scary. And it felt like an out of body experience. Now that I think about it, like my body was like writhing in pain. Like contractions at this point were back to back and literally on top of each other, lasting almost a minute, almost 2 minutes long. And I feel like I'd never felt any pain like that before. It felt like I was dying, and I had no idea what was going on. And again, what was making it more intense is that for some reason, I just felt the need to sit on the toilet the whole time I was in labor, which is gonna intensify your contractions. And so, like after that block of contractions happened, I decided to get up and go, like as I had a tiny little break, I was like, let me go lay on the couch and see if I can at least close my eyes, because by this time I felt extremely exhausted. And so I got up off the toilet, and I immediately felt like a bowling ball hit the top of my butt. And I guess it was the baby that had dropped into the canal, but I didn't even know what it was. I was just like, ow! It felt like something to my butt. It literally, like, I will kind of demonstrate what it feels like. It felt like, that's exactly what it felt like when she descended kind of right into the birth canal. And I went to go lay on the couch, and this was about 5 a.m. and I was trying to see if I can get some rest. And of course, the minute I lay down, the contractions just picked up again, and they were intense. And I went and I talked to my mom, and I was like, I need to see if I can get these contractions to like level out or even out, because I'm struggling at this point. And so I told her I was going to go take a shower, stripped off all my clothes, and I went to our master bathroom that's connected to our bedroom. And at this point, I turned the water on all the way hot, and I was standing in there. And for some reason, this is the most clarity I have throughout my whole labor. Again, the whole labor kind of felt like a fog. And at this point is when I got the most clarity. Everything just became clear in color, and I could think straight. And I was just like letting the water run all over me, and it just felt amazing. The contractions had stopped. I think that's probably why I felt clarity, is because the contractions weren't happening, or they weren't happening back to back. And I remember just thinking for the first time, and I think at least maybe 5 minutes had passed, and I remember just standing there, and then the water in the water in the tub just started to pool, and I ended up having a contraction. I think this was around 5:15 a.m. I think I had a contraction, and it was so intense that it brought me down to my knees. And I remember laying there after the contraction was over in the tub, and it felt so good. And I was just wading the water, rubbing my belly, and I just decided to feel, kind of see if I could see what was going on. And I thought I was swollen. It felt like I was swollen, so I was feeling something, kind of felt hard, but I thought I was just swollen down there, and I was like, huh, okay. And I was just touching there, feeling at it, laying there in the water as it pooled, and then suddenly, I think around maybe like 5:20-ish, I started to get the urge to push. And I bared down, and it was involuntary, like it just felt the feeling, and my body just started to bear down. And it must have been a couple of pushes just to kind of fully crown the baby. And my mom must have heard it because it was probably that loud. She comes around the corner, she pulls the shower curtain open, and she says, "Debbie, are you pushing?" And I was like, "Yep." And she was like, she paused for a second, and I took the curtain and closed it again. And she was like, "Mike, Debbie is pushing. Where is the midwife? Why haven't you guys called the midwife? She's about to have this baby." And I could hear it was as if I was there to see my husband. I could tell he probably went white because it went silent for a minute. And around like about 5:25, my husband calls the midwife, and I can hear the midwife at this point because he put the phone on speaker, and he tells the midwife, "Debbie says she needs to push," and Debbie is pushing. My midwife went silent for a minute, and she was like, "Okay, where is Deborah?" And he told her that I was in the shower, and she advised him that I should probably get out of the shower and try and get on the bed and get on all fours if I was just about to deliver this baby. And so my husband comes to the shower, and he's like, "All right, Deborah, we're gonna get you out and get you in bed." And so he's helping me out of the shower, and at some point I was just like, "Babe, can you tell me if am I swollen down there? Like what, I feel like I'm swollen, right? Or it's the baby's head." And so he goes down and looks, and he's like, "That's the baby's head, Deborah, that's the baby's head." And the midwife pauses for a minute, and she's calm. And then I think this was at 5:37-ish or so. By now she was like, "Mike, you're about to help deliver this baby. It's okay, you don't need to be scared, but I'll talk you through it if you need to. But I think Deborah knows exactly what she needs to do. It's not going to need much coaching." And so I get on my hands and knees, and then my husband's about behind me in this position, and I began to push. And I would say that the pushing stage was the least painful moment of my whole labor. I felt like all the pain had really gone away. Mostly, I feel like maybe because, I don't know, it got softened. The area down there, my vagina maybe got softened, or like the lips area got softened as I was laying in the water. Or I don't know, maybe it just felt that I was actually doing something with the contractions. So the contractions didn't feel painful at this point, and neither did pushing. But I did feel the ring of fire as the baby was starting to crown. And one thing I remember learning in birth class was ease the baby out, because if you push that baby through with such a force, you're definitely going to have some tearing. And I was so vain. I was I didn't want to have any tearing. And so I remember thinking, I need to ease this baby out and take control. So as I could feel her head crowning, and at this point I didn't know it was a girl, but obviously I did have a daughter, we decided to have a surprise gender. And so as her head became to crown, as it got close, I would stop, let it come back in, and then I would do it again just to pretty much kind of slowly ease her head out. And at the same point, I was kind of holding, this is again TMI, but I was also holding my butt just because I was I don't want to get hemorrhoids and get hemorrhoids as I'm pushing. So I was holding that and then slowly easing the baby out. And my husband's behind me. And then, so her head came out, and then my husband said, later on after, we were talking about the birth story, he was it was like a scene in Men in Black when that little alien was born. She came out, when she was, her head was out, but she was still in me. He was her eyes were jet black, and they were wide open, and she was just looking around. He said it was the freakiest moment of his life, of just looking at our half-born baby, and her eyes are open and she's looking, and she was just so alert. And So then at the next contraction, her body, the rest of her body just kind of like came out like jello. I didn't have to push or anything like that. So that was pretty painless. And she was born right into my husband's arms, and he like kind of wrapped her up in a towel. Actually, I think right when she was, after her head had come out, I forgot, my husband had told the midwife, because she was on the phone, and she didn't live too far away. I think she lived about 10 to 15 minutes away without traffic. And this was around like 5 in the morning, so there wasn't traffic. And so she had told us that she was already on her way. And she had told him when he had said that her head was out, she had told him, okay, Mike, this is the kind of part that you just maybe have to look to see if the cord's around the baby's neck. And see, and if it is around the neck, you can kind of dislodge it, but if it's not, you know, Deborah knows what to do. You don't need to be hands-on. My husband took that and tried to be a midwife and like attempted to stretch me. And I was just like, don't touch me, get your hands off me, don't touch me. The baby's fine, I'm fine. This whole part in the labor, I never felt panicked. Even when obviously my midwife's like, you guys are about to have this baby, you're gonna deliver it. I never felt scared or panicked. Everything just felt fine. I felt fine, the baby felt fine. And again, like had my mom not found me or heard me pushing in the tub, I probably would have delivered the baby in the tub by myself. I just felt so at peace and serene that I probably would have just ended up delivering this baby on my own in the bathtub. But I'm thankful for the way it played out, because obviously she was born right into my husband's arms. And so by the time she was born, my mom again was standing outside the room. I don't think my mom knew she was born yet. My midwife had told, because we had to let people into the apartment, my midwife had told us to send my mom down to go open the door. And at some point, my mom had called my twin sister to let her know I was in labor. She was like obviously frantic, because she was supposed to be there for the whole labor. And so she was also on the way. And then my midwife assistant was also on the way. And so my mom went down to go get everyone, because everyone lived super close at this time. And so by the time while she was gone down, the baby had been delivered. And so when they came up, I think the midwife ended up coming about 3 minutes after the baby was born or so. And I think from the pushing to when the baby was delivered, it was about like 15 to 17 minutes long, or 15 to 17 minutes long was how long the pushing stage was. After the baby was born, I was still in my hands and knees position. I wasn't worried about anything. I wasn't worried that anything was wrong with the baby. I heard her sneeze and like cough a few times. She didn't cry. It was actually super peaceful. It was just me, my husband, and the baby. And it was just so calm. It was still dark because it was only like 5 o'clock in the morning. It was the winter time. And so it was still pretty dark, and it was just so calm and peaceful. And I told my husband, because we still didn't know the gender. My husband was holding her behind me. I was like, so what is it? He was like, well, I don't know, I didn't look. I was like, well, look, what is it? We've been waiting for like this long. And so he opens the towel and he looks and he's like, it's a girl. And he starts crying. And it was just such a sweet moment. I don't think I'll ever forget it. He was just crying. And so everyone comes in, and then my sister rushes in, and she's like, no, my midwife comes in, and then I think the midwife's assistant comes in, and then my sister came in a little bit late after that, and she's like, oh, did I miss it? And we're like, yeah, the baby's already here. And she was like, oh my gosh. And we told her it was a girl, and she started to cry. My mom cried, realizing that, you know, obviously the baby's here and it was safe and it was born. And I was just like, can someone help me flip over? And just freezing. For some reason, after I give birth, I start to get really cold. My body starts shaking. I guess it's like maybe like the hormones or whatever. I don't know, maybe my adrenaline's like dips or whatever. And so I was starting to get really cold and like shaking. I was like butt naked. And so my mom just was like, oh, okay. And, I mean, not my mom, sorry, the midwife like kind of helped me on my back and, you know, put the baby on my chest. And it actually took a while for my placenta to come out this time around. For some reason, I'm not sure why. I didn't really get many contractions after the baby was born. It was at least not strong ones. And so around like the either 30 or 40-minute mark, my midwife was kind of like, you know, maybe we should start getting this jump started to get the placenta out. And so she started to rub my belly, just to try and stimulate it. And then she had given me some kind of tincture under my tongue, I think maybe to help my uterus to clamp down. I got a couple of contractions, but nothing strong. And so she told me to push. And after I pushing for a couple of times, the placenta just kind of fell out and it wasn't painful at all. And so I had minimal bleeding also to mention. And so after that, I put the baby to my breast. She latched on immediately and started nursing like a champ. It was such a sweet moment. And you know, that's one thing I love about home birth is like right after you have your baby, it's just pretty much you and your baby, you know, the midwives, and they're not super hands-on and they're not super handsy either. They just leave you with your baby. And we decided to do delayed cord clamping. And so the midwife just kind of, you know, did like the initial checks, and she kind of left. They left and like let us have a moment as a family. So we took some pictures and had some cuddles with the baby. My mom got to see the baby, and so my sister, and it was just such a sweet, sweet moment just with my husband, my sister, and my mom. And after that, I think after an hour or so, the midwife came back in, and we started to do the newborn exam.
I know, it's so warm on here. I'm just chilling like a villain.
That's to sleep.
Yeah. Time you can have it's okay. It's okay. Who's got glasses on? All right, Woodson. All right. She is 8 pounds and 4 ounces. 8 pounds. So you got the picture with the toes out and everything?
Yep, we got pictures.
My husband got to help do a lot of the examination, which was so sweet. Because I know that in a hospital setting, you probably wouldn't get all that intimate experience or hands-on experience with, you know, doing a newborn exam and learning about your new baby and watching them. And it was just so sweet. And I think after that, like they monitored me for a few hours after that, and then after that they clean up, they packed up, and you know they left. And you know if anything was wrong, they told us to obviously let them know and stuff like that. But nothing was wrong. Luckily, it was a very straightforward birth, and I think that's one thing when you have a really undisturbed birth and it's kind of fast, is that nothing. Your body will do what it's intended to do. And from start to finish, I think my labor was about 5.5 hours long, and it just kind of did what it was supposed to do, and it was just so peaceful. And I'm just so grateful that everything went well, especially having an unassisted birth for a first-time mom. But even during the experience, I didn't even feel like a first-time mom. I felt like I had done this before. It just like my body knew what to do, and so did my mind. I don't know how, but it's just, I guess, a natural instinct. And I would say that just because it was such a good birth experience, it kind of played out towards I think even my postpartum. The baby was able to latch very well. My milk came full force within 24 hours, and I had minimal bleeding. I had minimal pains. Actually, I did get afterbirth pains, and I will mention that no one ever talks about that, because I think I remember that day, the same day, the baby's nursing, I would get such strong contractions, and I'd be like, oh my God, what's going on? I feel like they were worse than labor contractions. I feel like maybe because you can't do anything about them, so they're kind of pretty painful. And I feel like no one ever talks about that, but afterbirth pains are horrific. And then they actually get worse with each baby. It got worse with my second. But again, with this birth experience, I was able to really have a great postpartum period. My mother was there to support me. We had other family there to support us if we needed it. but I actually really didn't need that much support. I think by the end of the night, I just felt right back to normal, and I pretty much went back to normal. I think within the next day, I was at Target shopping, which, you know, you probably shouldn't be upright, but I was. I felt perfectly fine. And I think by the end of the week, I got my nails and feet done, and people were like, "You just gave birth like a day ago?" I was like, "Yeah, I gave birth and I felt fine." But, you know, obviously that's not advisable for each time you give birth. Really grateful that I had such a great postpartum period, and I was able to have a great recovery period after birth. And I really credit that to having such a great, peaceful, powerful birth experience. And I think that, you know, when birth goes undisturbed, it can have great results. And I think that's all I had to say for this birth experience. I do plan to record my birth story with my second child. It was a home birth as well. Completely different experience. I do plan to film that, and I also we actually were able to film a lot of that labor and delivery, so I do plan to have another video for the birth story when I talk about it, and then actual footage of my home birth, and I'll film that. But I do plan to get those up soon, and I hope you guys do enjoy this, especially for first-time moms. I would love to hear from you, or even second-time moms, or even moms who've had fast labors or even unassisted births. I'd love to hear from you in the comments and let me know how your experiences went, and if it was similar to mine, if it was different. I would love to hear from you guys. I also, on my Instagram, if you don't follow me there, my handle is @Mama_Woodson. I'll also put it in the description below. I have a highlight where I do talk about home birth as well, so you can follow me on there if you want to hear more about labor and birth. I do plan to talk a lot more of that on my Instagram. But also, if you can like and subscribe to the channel, this would be very helpful. It shows support, and it also lets me know what you guys like to hear about. I do plan to have more pregnancy content. Obviously, in this stage of life, that's where I am. And so I just would love it if you guys would come along with me on this journey. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.